Not everything needs ambition, my mother said as my sister showed off her latest investor pitch. I just smiled. Less than 24 hours later, their $90 million deal hit a wall, one signature short.
Mine.
They never saw me coming. But when I entered the room, everything changed. I've learned that sometimes the best way to be seen is to first let people believe you're invisible. For 12 years, I played my part well, quiet, helpful, forgettable. Just the assistant, the one who fetched coffee, took notes, and smiled politely while others claimed the spotlight. But what no one knew, not my family, not my colleagues, not even my younger sister, was that I was never just the assistant. I was the one building the foundation beneath them all. My name is Riley Monroe, and this is the story of how I built an empire behind closed doors, and why I had to. It started the way a lot of painful stories do, with family. The Monroe family was known in Seattle for money, for fashion, and for being difficult. My mother, Cassandra Monroe, once ran one of the city's biggest fashion empires before retiring early, still sharp as a blade and twice as cold. To the world, she was elegant and composed. To me, she was impossible to please. My younger sister, Bianca, was her golden child, smart, flashy, always ahead of the curve. She launched a tech startup at 23, and by 27, she was on the cover of some business magazine, holding a phone like she'd invented the damn thing. And then there was me. I'd graduated from Stanford Business School with a plan I believed in deeply. A model for helping failing businesses restructure and thrive. I'd stayed up nights refining it, adjusting it, making sure it could stand up to the toughest boardrooms. When I came home that summer, excited to pitch it to the family, I thought maybe for once, they'd take me seriously. I remembered that dinner like a wound. I sat at the long marble table in my mother's Lakeview estate, explaining my idea while Cassandra sipped wine and Bianca scrolled through her phone. Restructure failing companies? Cassandra had said, barely hiding a smirk. Darling, you're not a Wall Street shark. You're too sensitive for that world. Bianca didn't even look up. Why not just come work for me, she offered. I need someone to manage admin stuff. It's perfect for you.
Perfect.
That night, I cried in my car for an hour, parked just beyond the gate of that mansion, listening to the wind whip off the lake. And then I made a decision. If my family couldn't see what I was capable of, I'd show them, but not right away.
Not yet.
I took my savings, everything I had, and found a tiny, dusty loft above a failing used bookstore in the Fremont district. It had squeaky floors, terrible plumbing, and one flickering light in the hallway. But it was mine. I registered the name Novacore Strategies and started building. At first, it was just me and a laptop. I worked 16 hours a day, surviving on takeout and cheap coffee. My first client was a struggling logistics company, barely hanging on. No one else would touch them. I studied their numbers, met their employees, and found what was broken. 3 months later, they were not only surviving, they were hiring again. Word spread. I hired slowly, carefully. I looked for people who were smart, discreet, and had something to prove. People like Ava, a brilliant analyst who had been turned down by 3 firms because she didn't fit the culture. We shared a bond, both underestimated, both hungry to prove everyone wrong. Every employee signed strict NDAs. My name was kept off public filings. To the outside world, I was just the office assistant, the quiet woman who scheduled meetings and ordered supplies. It was the perfect cover. My family never asked questions. When Cassandra or Bianca would call, rarely, it was always the same tone. Dismissive. Curious about others, never about me. I kept it that way. I let them believe I had settled. Because I knew something they didn't. Sometimes, silence is power. The years passed. Novacore grew faster than I ever imagined. We expanded to 10 cities. We helped turn around companies on the edge of collapse, restaurants, tech firms, shipping companies. We became known in the shadows as the firm you called when you had no hope left. And always I stayed hidden. Every Christmas, every birthday, every forced family gathering, I played the role. I smiled. I poured wine. I listened to Bianca brag about her rising app valuation while Cassandra looked on with pride. And they never once suspected that the assistant sitting quietly in the corner ran a company that had already surpassed Bianca's in revenue 2 years earlier. Then came the Monroe family gala. It was always a spectacle, held each spring at the estate, full of guests, lights, and enough champagne to drown a boat. That year was no different, except something inside me had started to shift. 12 years of biting my tongue, of letting them believe I was small, had begun to burn. I wore a plain black dress, like always, slipped into the room without drawing attention. Cassandra floated across the floor in her signature silver gown, greeting guests like royalty. Bianca arrived late, as usual, in a sparkling red number, her phone in one hand and a handsome investor in the other. "Oh look," Bianca said loudly as I approached the bar. "Seattle's most dedicated assistant is here." Cassandra laughed lightly. "Still fetching coffee, Riley? You know, I keep telling you, darling, you're wasting your best years hiding behind a desk." I smiled behind my glass. "Some of us prefer to work behind the scenes." "Well," Bianca said, already half turned away, "when you're ready to be part of something real, let me know. I'm hiring again." I nodded and said nothing, because what I had built was far more real than anything Bianca could imagine. And soon they were about to find out. What I didn't expect was how soon. Ava called me 2 days later. "You're going to want to see this," she said. "Blake Tech just reached out. They're being pressured into a merger by a group led by Monroe Ventures." My stomach twisted. Monroe Ventures was Cassandra's legacy. Bianca had taken over its business development arm last year. "Do they know who we are?" I asked. Ava laughed softly.
No.
"Not yet." I stared out the window of my corner office. Yes, the one on the top floor of Novacore's glass and steel headquarters. My reflection looked calm, but inside, something ignited. This wasn't just another client anymore. It was personal. The moment I learned Monroe Ventures was behind the Blake Tech takeover attempt, everything inside me went still, sharp, focused. After all these years, my mother and sister had finally wandered into my territory, and they had no idea. For more than a decade, I'd been protecting companies from the very kind of corporate predation they practiced. Now, the next company on their hit list had come straight to me. I didn't hesitate. I flew to San Diego the next day, met with Blake Tech's board, and walked them through a survival strategy. They were bleeding money due to a failed product launch and were terrified of a buyout. I showed them how to restructure without firing half their staff, cut unnecessary contracts, and rebuild their reputation. Within 4 months, their stock price had risen over 50%. Investors returned. Monroe Ventures' offer began to look desperate. Still, they pushed. They had a merger meeting scheduled with what they thought was the executive team of Novacore, completely unaware that I would be in the room, not as their assistant, but as the decision-maker. The one they had always overlooked. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I'd be there. I wanted to see their faces when they realized who they were really dealing with. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Ava worked overtime organizing data, contracts, and client portfolios. "Are you sure you want to reveal yourself now?" she asked one night as we sat in my office, well past midnight. The city lights of Seattle twinkled outside the glass walls. "I'm sure," I told her. "They've been walking around like queens of the market, thinking no one could ever touch them. It's time someone did." "Then you better wear something terrifying," she joked, handing me a file. "Bianca hates anything navy. Makes her feel washed out." I smiled. Navy it is. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early, walking through Novacore's private entrance. It felt surreal to step into that building, not as the woman who ordered catering and managed everyone's schedules, but as the architect of it all. I passed employees who still didn't know my real role, nodding as they whispered, "Good morning." Only a select few, like Ava, knew the truth. "They're here," Ava said, waiting by the elevator with her tablet in hand. "Your mother looks annoyed, and your sister is already trying to flirt with a receptionist." "Perfect," I said, smoothing the lines of my suit. "Let's give them something to talk about." I waited until exactly 9 a.m. before stepping into the conference room. The moment I opened the doors, the room fell silent. My mother was seated at the far end of the long table, legs crossed, wearing that same cold smirk she'd worn my entire life. Bianca sat to her left, scrolling through her phone as always. There were two Monroe Ventures advisors there too, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Bianca glanced up first, frowning. Riley? Did someone call in catering? I thought this was a CEO-level meeting. I don't serve coffee anymore, I said calmly, walking to the head of the table. And this is a CEO-level meeting. You're looking at her. The room went still. Cassandra slowly removed her sunglasses. What game are you playing? No game, I said, placing my hand on the back of the chair at the head. I'm Riley Monroe, founder and CEO of Novacore Strategies. You? Bianca blinked, confused. That's impossible. You worked reception. I built this company from nothing, I continued, starting in a dusty attic above a bookstore while you were busy playing Tech Princess and Mom was too busy calling my business plan a fantasy. I took my seat. Now, Novacore holds assets worth $87 billion. And your merger proposal? It's on my desk. I let Ava hand out the printed financials. One of the advisors began flipping through pages, his face turning pale. We've been saving companies from vultures like Monroe Ventures for years, I said. Companies like Metro Ship Logistics, Green Star Farms, Blake Tech. You tried to take them. We saved them. You've been sabotaging our deals, my mother said, voice low and sharp. No, I replied evenly. I've been helping companies survive. If that interfered with your plans, well, maybe you should have done your homework. Bianca slammed her tablet shut. This is blackmail. This is business, I corrected. You have until 3 p.m. to agree to our merger terms, which include Novacore acquiring a controlling interest in Monroe Ventures private holdings. If you don't sign, we begin buying shares tomorrow on the open market. Your investors will panic. And I'll be there waiting. Ava stepped forward with a final document. Also, she said, placing it in front of Bianca, we're releasing internal communications from your company. Emails mocking Riley, questioning her intelligence. Board memos calling her unfit for leadership. Bianca's face turned red. You hacked my files? No, Ava said, smiling. Your assistant sent them to us. Apparently, she's been a Novacore client for 2 months. Guess she got tired of being called stupid too. The silence that followed was almost comical. I stood slowly, buttoning my blazer. You always thought I was the weakest one. You treated me like background noise. But you forgot that quiet people can still build things. Strong things. Things that last. My mother stared at me, eyes narrowed. You planned this all along. I built this while you weren't looking, I said. The only thing I planned was waiting for the right moment. As I left the room, I heard Bianca mutter something under her breath. I didn't care. That day wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. They had until 3 o'clock. And they were finally, truly out of time. When I left that conference room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see. My mother stunned into silence, Bianca fuming and spiraling, and their advisors scrambling to assess the damage. I didn't need confirmation. The silence in that room had told me everything. For the first time, they saw me not as an assistant, not as someone they could talk over, but as a threat they hadn't seen coming. Back in my office, Ava was already fielding calls. 2 of Monroe Ventures board members just requested a private meeting, she said, tapping rapidly on her tablet. They want to know if the merger is still possible, just without your sister and mother involved. I smiled faintly. Tell them to review the terms. Nothing has changed. If they want Novacore, they take me as I am. I sat at my desk and exhaled. The feeling was unfamiliar, relief mixed with fire. For 12 years, I had been building and hiding, smiling while biting my tongue, growing a company that stood for everything my family didn't. Novacore wasn't just a business. It was a statement that you could lead with strategy, not ego, that you could uplift without tearing down, that you didn't have to be loud to be powerful. I glanced at the time. It was only 10:30 a.m. They still had 4.5 hours to make a choice. And I already knew how the rest of the day would go. By noon, the headlines had started. Secret CEO revealed. the woman behind Novacore Strategies. Monroe Air exposed by Sister's billion-dollar power play. My assistant forwarded me links as they rolled in. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The world was starting to notice what my family had refused to see for over a decade. At 1:45, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Cassandra, you could have come to us. You didn't have to do this in public. I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it. There was no apology in her words, just a desperate attempt to maintain control, to reframe the story so she didn't look like the villain. But the truth was I had come to them once, with a pitch, with hope, with trust, and they'd laughed me out of the room. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. At 2:20, Bianca showed up at Novacore without an appointment. Ava intercepted her, of course, but I decided to see her anyway. I wanted to hear what she had to say when there was no one around to impress. She stepped into my office like she still owned the world, though the cracks in her armor were obvious, dark circles under her eyes, her phone clutched tightly in her hand like it was a lifeline. You made your point, she said, standing just inside the door. Now what? You want to humiliate us further? I leaned back in my chair. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I wanted to run my business. You made it personal. You could have just told me, she said, pacing. I would have listened. I would have supported you. I raised an eyebrow. Like when you offered me a job managing your calendar. Or when you told Mom I was too timid to lead anything more than a lunch order. She didn't answer. I didn't tell you because I needed to know for sure. I needed to prove to myself that I could do this without any of you. That I wasn't just the sister or the shadow. Bianca looked around the office. So, this is what matters to you now? Power? No, I said simply. Respect. And that starts by being honest about who we are and what we're capable of. She sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. You know they're going to vote in favor of the merger. They don't have a choice. Our numbers are collapsing. Investors are pulling out. I know, I said. That's why the terms are still on the table, until 3 o'clock. Bianca stared at me for a moment longer, then walked out without another word. I watched her leave, a strange sadness curling in my chest. We had grown up together. We had shared bunk beds and secrets, Sunday morning cartoons and late-night stories. But somewhere along the way, the space between us had widened into a canyon neither of us could cross. At 2:47, Ava walked in, her expression calm but excited. It's done. The board accepted the merger. I nodded. Prepare the press release. And let's get started on the transition plan. She paused. You okay? I thought about it. The anger, the fear, the years of pretending, all of it had led here. I felt lighter. Not giddy. Not triumphant. Just free. I'm okay, I said. Then I reached for the intercom. Send in Cassandra Monroe. She entered without knocking, her heels clicking against the floor like gunfire. Her posture was perfect as always. Her expression unreadable. I assume you're pleased with yourself, she said. No, I replied. I'm focused on what comes next. You've embarrassed the family. No, I corrected. You embarrassed yourselves when you refused to see me. I just stopped waiting for your permission to succeed. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of what to say. I slid a folder across the desk. This is your new position. Senior advisor. You can accept or walk away with the severance listed on page 3. She opened it slowly. You planned everything. I met her gaze. I learned from the best. And I had. I learned how to smile while being underestimated, how to turn rejection into rocket fuel, how to stay quiet just long enough to take control. She left without saying goodbye. I didn't watch her go. I was too busy writing the next chapter. The days after the merger were a whirlwind. My calendar filled with press inquiries, business school invitations, and interview requests from media outlets I'd once only dreamed of. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in becoming a media sensation. Novacore wasn't built on noise, it was built on results. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. The kind that moved beneath the surface until they were undeniable. Still, I agreed to speak at one event, a Women in Leadership Summit hosted in San Francisco. Standing on that stage in front of hundreds of young professionals, I saw reflections of who I used to be. Women with ideas but no platform, confidence but no support. I told them what I wish someone had told me. You don't have to raise your voice to have power. You just have to keep building until the world can't ignore you. When I stepped down from the stage, I was greeted by a familiar face in the crowd, Ava, standing off to the side, holding her phone. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, passing it to me. It was a post from one of Bianca's former investors. A long, passive-aggressive paragraph trying to shift blame for the failed merger, ending with a line that made me laugh out loud. Bianca Monroe's poor judgment in underestimating key business players has cost this firm dearly. There it was. The truth, out in the open. And I hadn't even needed to say it myself. Back in Seattle, changes at Monroe Ventures happened quickly. We restructured the company into something leaner, more ethical. Gone were the aggressive acquisition tactics. We focused on partnerships, sustainability, and innovation. Some employees resisted, but most adapted. They were tired of working under fear. Now they worked with purpose. Cassandra officially retired 1 month after the merger. Her resignation letter was short, but the final paragraph surprised me. "My daughter taught me that leadership isn't about control, it's about vision. I only wish I had seen her clearly sooner." It didn't erase everything, but it was something. A small bridge between what we had been and what we might still become. Bianca, on the other hand, took longer to accept the shift. She disappeared from the public eye for a while, and I later heard she was working on a new venture. Quietly this time, without fanfare. Maybe she finally understood the value of building before boasting. What surprised me most were the messages from women. Hundreds of them. Former assistants, junior analysts, interns, all saying the same thing. "You gave us hope." I hadn't expected that. I built NovaCore for myself, yes, but knowing it had become a symbol for others made it feel even more real. The following spring, I did something no one expected, not even Ava. I hosted the Monroe family gathering. But this time, it was held in NovaCore's executive conference room. The same one where, for years, I had quietly set out coffee, taken notes, and played invisible. Now, I stood at the head of the room as guests arrived. My cousins blinked in surprise. Some smiled, others avoided eye contact. Cassandra arrived late, of course, perfectly composed, but I caught a flicker of pride in her eyes. When Bianca walked in, she looked around and gave me a small nod. Not an apology, not a surrender, but an acknowledgement. I nodded back. Dinner was served by NovaCore's hospitality team, coffee from our own blend, produced by a company we'd acquired quietly last fall. The same one that used to supply Cassandra's favorite cafe. Full circle. That night, as the laughter of polite conversation filled the air, I stepped onto the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. Ava joined me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "Think they'll ever truly understand what you did?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I didn't build this to prove something to them. I built it because I knew I could. And because women like us needed a space where we could lead without asking permission." She smiled. "Still want me to call you boss?" I laughed. "Only when I'm being difficult." I looked out at the skyline. Tall buildings, sharp edges, glowing windows. A city that had once seemed too big for someone like me. Now it was mine. Not because I shouted the loudest or pushed the hardest, but because I waited. I built. I believed. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. About rewriting the story they wrote for me and crafting my own ending. And the best part? I was just getting started.